I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my fantabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together we're going to bring you an incredible hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families, and the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, and pretty much everybody and everything, because we are all wrapped up together on this incredible wibbly-wobbly planet that we call Earth. And we got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to just chat for a little bit here for a few more minutes, and we are back with texting during the show. If you want to text at any time in the next hour, we'll be happy to take your text at 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841. And of course, you can call 877-909-1007. And so after we're done chatting, we're going to have an interview, an incredible interview with Dr. Cassandra Brooks. And she is somebody who studies Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. And she's fresh back from a trip to the Southern Hemisphere. And I managed to snag an interview with her. It took a long time, but I was very happy that I stuck with
Cassandra's sort of an unfortunate name for an environmentalist.
Yes, bringing in the cultural point there.
Yeah.
Cassandra had sort of an unfortunate end in mythology, as I recall.
She did, yeah.
Okay, all right. But after we talk with Cassandra, we will be hearing from our wonderful, wonderful advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca will be talking to us about a seasonally appropriate topic. What will you be talking about today, Rebecca?
Is potato.
Potatoes. Okay, is potato. All right.
Yes.
Something to look forward to. And then we have our ecological news, and one of the stories we have here is the story that never dies. And regular listeners.
Oh God, no, not that again.
Yes, regular listeners.
We all know what it is. Yeah.
Yes, it's an update on the HB6 scandal, which just keeps going and going. But very happy to be talking with you, and hopefully you'll join us at some point during the next hour. And we had, just a word of warning coming in, that it looks like that the roads are kind of setting up to create that black ice situation, because you got the light snow getting kind of pushed down by the cars, and it seems like ice was sort of getting ready to form in some places. So drive careful if you're out today. So it's getting cold. Finally, even though, here we are
It's like
almost.
December out there. Actual real December.
Yeah, the way we remember it, but not quite as much snow. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I have my garden this year, and it was kind of a chaotic garden. I had, I got tons of tomatoes and planting stuff out of it, but I didn't really weed it. And so now I've got 6 foot tall grasses and weeds and stuff still in my garden area. I couldn't bring myself to tear them down. And interestingly, I have noticed there is a flock of what are called Vesper Sparrows centered on my garden. And now I can't like tear down those big tall plants because they're eating the seeds and stuff off of them. And Vesper Sparrows are these cool little sparrows. They're native to North America. I mean, you always think about sparrows, you think those European house sparrows that have taken over everything, but Vesper Sparrows are native, and they're the ones that have, if you look at their tails, they've got two cool little white feathers on the back of their tails when they fly off. So, and they have a cool song, and so now I'm like stuck
Well, at
with it.
some point they'll have eaten all the seeds, won't they? Before spring, you would think?
I don't know. They seem to be very good at sort of pacing themselves.
Parceling them out,
Yeah,
okay.
I've noticed that. They don't,
Well, they're small birds. They can
Yeah.
only fit so many seeds at a time.
yeah, and they're smarter than people give them credit for, too.
Right.
But I just wanted to mention that, and they have a nice song, too. They're called Vesper Sparrows because they sing in the evening.
Oh,
And so
cute.
it's very nice. A couple other very nice things, very nice updates on a couple stories we've been following. One is we mentioned last week HJR 6, House Joint Resolution 6. This is the one where the Republicans wanted to change the percentage of votes that you'd have to get on a citizen referendum to 60% instead of 50% plus one vote, in order to make it harder for citizens to pass referendums and to discourage people from putting referendums forward, because if you know you have to get 60% of the vote, you're not going to waste the thousands and thousands of man hours or person hours to get that on a ballot. It got withdrawn. The Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, who proposed it, was taking tons of political heat because people from all across the political spectrum were like, what are you doing?
See, this is the thing that people don't get on the coast. That for every crazy sounding horrible bill that comes out of Ohio or other states, local activists have beaten back 9.
Yeah, that's
Similarly
true.
or worse. You're welcome.
Yeah, and along those lines, another story that we've been following, in fact, our main story from last week, HB 434, we beat it. That HB 434 was the bill that was proposing to turn Ohio into a nuclear waste dump by creating an authority that would have complete control over all things radioactive in the state of
It
Ohio.
even sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it?
It does. And even the Republicans on the committee were like, I'm not sure about this authority, because it would literally take all the authority away from the governor, from the legislature, from the courts. This little group of insiders would have controlled everything and had no oversight. And it died in committee, just the way we were
And
trying
the
to
people
get it
from
to.
this thing would sort of, instead of being voted on by our representative, would be appointed by via some mystical ceremony involving puffs of smoke, we assume,
That's
out
right.
of the nuclear tower.
Right, in robes.
It would have been,
yeah.
chanting.
Dosimeters were involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a weird bill, but it died. It died in committee. So at least for this
R.I.P.
session, we won on that one. So now they can bring it back next session, but this was the third time, and often 3 times is like, if you're a 3-time loser on legislation, lots of times people won't even, they'll be like, why are we bothering with this again? It died 3 times, we're not going to try it again. So fingers are crossed that HB 434 is dead for good. And so that, I watched the almost the entire subcommittee, energy subcommittee hearing where they didn't bring it up and vote on it to make sure that it died, that it did not get out of committee. And I just, there was part of what would happen there was kind of instructive. Something that did pass was the governor had a whole bunch of appointments to different committees, and he had an appointment to the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. And there was just an interesting exchange. Our local senator, Paula Hicks Hudson, objected to one of the appointments, just one out of there were about 30 appointments the governor just flew through, and she said, I object to one of them, and so that was going to require a roll call vote and discussion, so she could say, why she opposed this one guy on the PUCO, and it could be because he was at one point the vice president of a natural gas company.
Yippers.
But we didn't get to find out why she objected to the one, because she voted to pass, the chair was like, okay, you're objecting to the one, how about we vote on all the rest? And everybody said, okay, let's vote on all the rest, and they passed him with no objections. Then he said, okay, we'll come back to the one, any discussion? And there was silence. He said, okay, well, since there's no discussion, let's go to a vote. And Paula Hicks Hudson then voted for the guy that she objected to.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, and everybody, I was like, what the heck? And even the chair, after the vote was done, the chair was like, Paula, did you mean to vote for this guy you objected to? And she was like, what? No, I didn't want to do that. And so, and then she made out like she had no idea what was going on, even though she was the only one who objected to any of the governor's appointments. And so then the chair said, would you like to change your vote to a no? And Paula Hicks Hudson was like, I guess so, I think so. And he said, and so then the chair told the secretary, okay, record her vote as a no. And it just, the Democrats are supposed to be like an opposition party. They're supposed to like oppose
yeah, that
things.
is the theory.
And, there's a point at which it just sort of becomes like theater. And that's the point that we passed here. It was kind of like bad theater. It's kind of like theater where, it's like a community theater where like the lead forgets their lines in the middle of the show. And it was just kind of disappointing. But I'm very happy that both HB 434 and HJR 6 went down to defeat legislatively. Let's hope we can hold them off again in the next session of legislature. Let's hope they actually never come up again. Fingers are crossed.
That'd be real good.
Yeah. But something that is coming up with increasing frequency is discussion of the Southern Ocean, the bottom part of our planet. Basically, it's a very interesting area. It includes Antarctica, of course, but it also includes the ocean all around Antarctica. And it's really a unique ecosystem, and we here in Ohio actually are dependent on the health of that ecosystem to maintain our climate, to give us enough food. And it's an interesting area because there isn't really like an indigenous population. There aren't really people living there who speak for it, apart from scientists who live in McMurdo Bay and so forth. And so those scientists have kind of come forward to say, we're having problems down there. We're overfishing. We're ignoring some of the biggest problems facing what is actually the most pristine area in the world right now. And so I landed this great interview with Dr. Cassandra Brooks, and let's go listen to that right now. Cassandra Brooks, welcome to For a Green Future. Could you just tell us a little bit about who you're with, who do you work for, and what organizations you're in?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. So I am currently an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I very much work at the intersection of science and policy and the public, and very much around conservation solutions for the oceans around Antarctica. I do work in other areas too, but certainly my heart has been in the Antarctic for the last more than 15 years.
Oh, that's great. Now you've been traveling the last couple of months, I guess. Could you tell us some of the places you've been and a little bit of what you've seen?
Yeah, sure. I've had about, I think, 5 trips in the last 2 months, post-COVID makeup trips. The first one was a really exciting one where I got to go to Washington, D.C. to receive the Jackie Ronnie Award and that was through the Society for Women Geographers. And Jackie was actually the first American woman to go to Antarctica and was one of the first women to overwinter there. And this award is to honor an up-and-coming woman who also works in Antarctic research or exploration. And it was a really big honor to get that award. And they told me when I was there that I got it for my work to protect Antarctica, but also my work mentoring the next generation of women scientists as well. So that was a huge honor for this woman who really, if she hadn't have done what she did, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. All these women who actually came before me, paving new ground so that women could actually go to Antarctica, right? And so that was a very exciting moment. Shortly after that, I got to go to Hobart, Tasmania, Australia to participate in these international negotiations about the oceans around Antarctica. And those happen every October in Tasmania. We've been online for a couple of years, like everybody has. And so it was really exciting actually to be back in person and to have all these countries come together where they negotiate about Antarctica. So that was one of my biggest trips. I don't need to say them all, but that one was it was very exciting.
Is that the Committee for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Life that you're talking about?
Yeah, you're close. Commission for the Conservation, of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, and the terrible acronym is CAMLR. So say that 50 times fast,
Well, one of my questions later on, but I guess we could just jump right to it, is how did that go? Because this was kind of a critical meeting this time.
Yeah, it was a critical meeting in a lot of ways. First of all, we hadn't been in person together for 3 years. And so online diplomacy does not work. Like it just really does not. You're working across all these time zones. You don't have time for that face-to-face interaction, which actually is what can lead to us, finding common ground, right? Is having coffee together, or talking in the hallway outside of the formal negotiation. So we got to have these in-person meetings. There was a lot on the table this year. Climate change is increasingly showing its impact in the Antarctic. And we know that the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, are the fastest changing places in the world. And many people have been pushing really hard for better management in the face of climate change, for us to actually consider it. And when I'm in the room at CAMLR, I sit on a science advisory, kind of like, it's called the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. And we're a non-governmental group who sits in the room.
Yeah. That would be SCAR, SCAR.
I know, exactly. These terrible acronyms. And actually the group I sit on, it's a SCAR group called SCATS. So it gets even worse. It's like this acronym soup when you're down there. But yeah, so we actually submitted a big synopsis of all the IPCC reports on what's happening in Antarctica and what are the things we need to be considering. So we actually were able to give a lecture this year and try to raise the sort of awareness and the bar on we really need to do something now. Emperor penguins were actually recently listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. I don't know if you heard about that, but that just happened a couple months ago. So these are things that we were drawing attention to, but also just all the things we're seeing about the melting, the ice sheets, the glaciers, all these things melting and retreating, the warming, and the impacts that we're seeing on krill and birds and mammals, right? And so a lot of those things were discussed. And maybe one of the most exciting outcomes of the meeting is that we did get a climate resolution passed at CAMLR, where countries agreed to basically talk about it more, to do more in the face of climate change, which is really exciting. But that said, it was a difficult year. As folks know, the war in Ukraine is spilling out into everything, and Ukraine and Russia are both members of CAMLR. And so that made things very, very tense and difficult in the room. And Antarctica is this place of international peace and science. If you haven't read the Antarctic Treaty, I recommend you read it. It's 12 simple pages, beautifully written, about how Antarctica shouldn't be this place of international discord. It should be this place of peace and science and collaboration. And it really, the treaty was signed at the height of the Cold War, when countries actually were threatening to use Antarctica for military purposes. And instead of doing that, countries came together and signed this treaty and set aside this area. And I love that, because you see it reflective in the way countries behave. And that's why it makes it so difficult when two members are at war, right? Because that it's no, we're all here in this space to be diplomatic and peaceful and to work towards science. So.
Okay. Well, I'm glad a positive statement came out of the conference. Let's back up a little bit. So your area of study is what's called the Southern Ocean. Could you sort of define that for people?
Sure. It officially became its own ocean only in the last couple of years. You probably know this or maybe heard about it on other media. It was a big deal when the Southern Ocean was we always talked about it as a Southern Ocean, and I always figured it was a geographic reality. Well, now it is. So some people actually define it differently. Some people define it as south of 40 or south of 60. Within CAMLR, it's largely defined as south of the polar front. There's this amazing current that goes all the way around Antarctica, right? And that current, because Antarctica is this continent surrounded by water, right? And so it actually, the winds can whip around it, and then these currents can whip around it as well. And it creates a bit of a barrier where a lot of the waters below that are freezing or closer to freezing, and waters north of it are not. And so that is this ecological barrier, if you will. And certainly lots of whales cross it, animals do cross that barrier, birds cross it, but it does create this ecological barrier where a lot of the fish that are further south have antifreeze in their blood, right? Like some of the other animals will too, because they're living in waters that are below the point of freezing, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how I would define the Southern Ocean, is that sort of space south of the polar front.
Cool. All right. Now that area has been called it's the most remote. It's also been called sort of the healthiest ecosystem left on Earth. What does a healthy ecosystem look like? What is that? How does that manifest in stuff that you see?
Sure. What does a healthy ecosystem look like? Well, so yes, so we there's been many efforts to raise the profile of the Southern Ocean and specific regions of it. And there have been these amazing analyses that have come out showing that, yeah, the waters around Antarctica are some of our healthiest or most intact places that we have left in the entire world, right? Places where mining is actually banned in Antarctica. People don't live there beyond scientists. Scientists do their science there, tourists come, but people aren't living there all the time. So just your levels of human use are a lot lower. There is commercial fishing, and increasingly more and more there is commercial fishing. But we've been trying to raise awareness about this. And in particular, the Ross Sea Antarctica is an area that both my partner, John Weller, and I worked on for a long time with millions of other people to actually get it set aside as a large marine protected area, which happened in 2016. And we actually branded that place, the Ross Sea, as the last ocean, to actually get that point across of like, here's this last large intact ecosystem left. There are other parts around Antarctica, like the Weddell Sea is actually on the opposite side of the Ross Sea. And that place is also like very untouched, very much intact. So we do have these areas around Antarctica that are amazingly left intact. It's very far away. It's very icy. So that protects it. But what it looks like is you actually have a system that has all of its pieces. You have the predators and the prey. You don't have these huge gaps in this system in total this damaged system. And that's to say a lot of places that we see in the world, especially in the oceans, are like so overfished or overused or just polluted that we don't even know what they once looked like. Like we don't even have a baseline of what did it look like when you had all your predators, right, in the system. Now that said, Antarctica was a place where it was heavily, heavily whaled and heavily, heavily sealed. And so we do have like the system recovering from that, particularly the whales have continued to recover. And we're trying to understand better how that's impacting the system. And now we have more commercial fishing. So we're having some of these recoveries, where the whales are coming back, and also new threats like in the form of fishing and climate change. So even though we have these healthy systems, we still have a lot of threats and in some places, a lot of recovery happening. So, but in terms of like, as a biologist, when you go to Antarctica and you see this place that's just thriving with life and like large animals, penguins that aren't afraid of you, whales coming out of the water, you're finding fish that have never been named, with all these crazy adaptations, this antifreeze in their blood. So it's just a very rich and full of life place, even though it's so extreme and so cold.
Cool. So what's the most urgent threat right now? What's the most urgent issue that you see?
Absolutely climate change. I mean, absolutely. Where, I mean, it's I can't overstate it, where just the retreat of glaciers, the collapse of ice shelves, just the way that's changing the whole system. Penguin species in some places are declining and other places increasing, depending on if they depend on warmer or colder temperatures or what they eat. Antarctic krill are the basis of the entire food chain. Everything eats krill. They're this hugely abundant, like small shrimp-like crustacean, and they are contracting south. right? So as the temperatures are actually warming, they're moving south with the colder ones. They can't keep moving south. There's a continent there, right? And of course, Antarctica being this place that stores so much of the world's fresh water, the melting is having global implications for sea level rise. Antarctica actually drives global ocean circulation. It actually stores a lot of heat and carbon dioxide. So it's creating this huge buffer for climate change for the world that a lot of people are not aware of. And so these massive changes that are happening there are going to lead to more fires where I live in Colorado, right? It's going to lead to sea level rise in cities that are already low lying, right? And so this is why I think we all need to know about Antarctica and know how important it is to all of us that we do what we can. And obviously we can only do so much in Antarctica. And one of the things I advocate for is things like marine protected areas. So climate change is damaging the system. Can we at least stop fishing while we let the system adapt and recover, right? And not add this extra threat to the system. In the meantime, we absolutely have to work within the United Nations, right? To reduce emissions, to actually focus on these global solutions, because Antarctica won't recover on its own, right? We need a global effort to do that.
So what's one experience you've had down there in the Antarctic area that kind of made you stop and go, wow, I would not see this anywhere else on the earth? Just
Sure. I mean, yeah, I guess probably my first time going, which was in 2006. And I grew up in rural New Hampshire. And I would say that I never thought I'd do so many of the things I've been able to do in my life, but I certainly never thought I'd go to Antarctica. And so I remember being out on the deck, and the wind is so icy. Like you can literally feel this like ice. The waters are below the point of freezing. So like, if you fall in, you will die. And then you're standing on the deck, and then all of a sudden you see your first iceberg, and it's just massive. It's this massive commanding feature, right, in the environment. And then of course, again, the wind, the weather is just so extreme. And then you see a whale pop up beside you, and you get this like wet scent of krill that hits your face, from its breath, because it's curious. It's like, oh, I haven't seen a vessel in a while. And then, you get these just extreme 24-hour daylight in the summer. And then, of course, as you get your first sunset, and you see these unfamiliar stars, at least for me, the Southern Cross. And it's so dark, like there just there isn't artificial life there, artificial light at all. Like it's just such a dark, beautiful, beautiful place when you actually get that. But also just, again, it's such an extreme, austere, beautiful environment. So I think that's really what grabbed me so early on, was just how immensely alive and humbling it made me feel, this remote, beautiful place that, and then again, when I went for the first time, I was going because I was studying Antarctic toothfish. And the reason I was studying them is that there was a call for stronger management because they were increasingly being fished and sold as Chilean sea bass. And I think that's really what gripped me, to be honest, was like going there, you're so far away, and realizing like, oh my gosh, we're literally fishing the ends of the earth to try to get what's left in the waters. Like, and we're doing that because we've damaged the oceans everywhere else. So we're just sending these vessels literally to the most remote waters on earth and to the most dangerous waters on earth, where fishermen then have to risk their lives to catch these sort of remaining pockets of fish. So I think that's really also what grabbed me in that moment, right? Like here's the contradiction of this amazingly rich environment, and then it being fished, right?
So you mentioned MPA, I guess that's Marine Protected Area.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's kind of a race going on now between the fishermen and the scientists who are trying to define these MPAs. How's the race going? Who's in the lead?
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe an accurate way to put it to some degree. However, there certainly are, like in the case of the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area, and it's absolutely massive. It includes the areas under the ice shelf. It's more than 2 million kilometers squared, so it's huge. And the fishing industry was very supportive of it. And they were supportive of it because if a protected area is well designed, it actually can increase fisheries yield. So you protect a certain part of the fish population, you protect in particular the babies, you let them grow up, and then they what's called spill over. They actually swim out of the protected area into the place where they can be fished. And so that's the important thing, is that to make sure that for toothfish in particular in the Ross Sea, that fishing is still ongoing outside of the protected area and a little bit, some pockets inside, and making sure that like, are we protecting the fish where it needs to be so that it actually can spill over and be caught in a more sustainable fashion. Now that said, there are more and more scientists, and I was one of them. We actually put out a paper this fall suggesting that we need marine protected areas. We need climate resilient management. We need lots of enhanced things to consider in management. But if we can't do all those things, then we might consider not fishing, right? Like we might consider let the system, again, it's already threatened by climate change. Maybe we should leave it alone and protect the whole thing, right? And obviously that's not politically popular because there is still a lot of interest in fishing down there. But I would challenge and say that we need to manage better, and we need to not just have a protected area in the Ross Sea, but we need to think about them other places and work with the fishing industry, right? Like how do we design one that enhances the whole system so that actually everybody can benefit, and that it is possible. Like we've seen that in other places that we can do that.
Okay, that's pretty much all we have time for. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Only to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today, and just learn what you can about Antarctica and the Southern Ocean, and know that your survival and the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the healthy system that we have today really depends on a healthy Antarctica.
All right. And that was our interview. What did you think? Give us a call at 877-909-1007 and tell us what you thought about our interview with Cassandra Brooks. Or, of course, you can text 419-973-5841. And I'd like to really urge people to watch the YouTube version of this, because Dr. Brooks, half her communication is like with her hands.
Yeah.
As an Italian American, that kind of spoke to me. So it's like just the incredible enthusiasm and passion that she has, that so many of our guests have for the area of the globe that they're trying to protect. This was kind of like an inspiring interview. So if you want to hear it again, definitely check out the YouTube version. That should be up Tuesday, maybe Monday, but probably Tuesday. All right, now speaking of inspiration, I am every week inspired by our advertisers and patrons. Yay! For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats and lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, which is simply wcparks.org. And they have an app. You can go to an app store and search for WC Parks. And of course, they're on social media. They're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those things that you'd expect a great organization like the Wood County Park District to be on. And we're also brought to you by our great patrons. And these are people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. And there they searched for A Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. And they chose a membership level that matched their budget. And so every month a little bit comes out of their budget and comes over to us. And that's how we can manage to keep this show on the air. So a great big thank you, and we love you, to our patrons. And one of the things that we do with our airtime every week is Rebecca does some exhaustive research into some aspect of the natural world. What are we talking about this week,
It's exhausting to me, but I tire easily. Right. We're talking about potatoes in honor of Hanukkah, which is either beginning or ending today. I don't actually know which. So anyway, I'm hoping there are people out there who know more than, don't rely on me to tell you when it's Hanukkah. Potatoes, I should make latkes, of course. Yesterday we did oil. I don't know, I'm going to have to do stuff about the exact area where the events happen next year or something. I don't know about the temple and the oil and stuff and the lamp. Anyway, yeah, the potato is a starchy tuber of in the Solanum tuberosum is the species name. It's native to the Americas, so when you're tucking into your traditional American mashed potatoes and chicken with apple pie and maybe some corn, at least the corn and the potatoes are two things that actually come from your hemisphere and are rightfully traditional American, in a sense. So yeah, it's a perennial in the nightshade family, or Solanaceae. They're a wild species, potato species growing in the southern U.S. all the way down to southern Chile, near the Antarctic.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, originally it was thought for a long time that various native peoples had sort of convergently all discovered potatoes at once and started cultivating them. But genetic studies actually suggest that they originated in southern Peru and northwestern Bolivia, where they were domesticated between 7,000 to 10,000 years ago from the species Solanum Brucaule complex of species. It's hard to say. Anyway, there's this one species in southern Peru that apparently an overwhelming majority of the species in potatoes and cultivations today come from. And they spread out from there. And that is apparently, the genetics tell us how it happened. There are close relatives of that species that are still cultivated in the Andes. So there's a bunch of sort of potato cousins down there that never made it out of the local area, apparently. They were introduced in Europe by the Spanish in the late 1500s, sorry. And they are the world's fourth largest food crop, with 5,000 types of potatoes existing that are just the product of selected breeding. So we sort of took potato and made it into this other stuff that is kind of a potato.
Well, they had the native tribes had several hundred of those 5,000 to begin with, right? They had a lot of different varieties too. They didn't just have the potato.
Right. So 90% of potatoes in current cultivations are varieties that are originated, okay, I said that. The lowlands of south central Chile is exactly where they come from. Right now, North and Eastern Europe grow the most potatoes per capita. But production in South and Southern and Eastern Asia has expanded rapidly after 2000 to the point where China and India are now the world leaders in production as of 2018. So I don't really know if they're eating them themselves or sending them to us.
I think they're probably eating them.
Could be. Yeah, maybe they've gotten popular. I don't know. But yeah, most of the potato plant stems, leaves, etc. contain dangerous levels of toxic solanine because it's a nightshade, and nightshade is poison. So yeah, the sprouts and the skins can also have enough glycoalkaloids to affect human health if they're exposed to sun and turn green. So you want to not do that. If they look green, you might want to just lop that bit off. And I think I've eaten potatoes that were green and not had anything really horrible happen to me. You might have to, it might depend on your individual tolerance. That probably wasn't a good idea on my part, but I'm still here. So yeah, the word comes from a combination, I think, of the Taino word batata, meaning sweet potato, and the Quechua word papa for potato. But sweet potatoes are batata actually means sweet potato, and sweet potatoes are in the morning glory family and absolutely no relation to potatoes, except for they're both, I don't know, plants, carbon-based life forms, something like that. But yeah, I kind of wondered about that, so I looked it up specially, and
so, batata, papa, let's call the whole thing off, or not? Okay.
Something, yeah. Yeah. The Tainos and the Quechua called the whole thing off, I guess. I don't know.
All right. Well, that's cool. All right. So thank you for that little bit of information that the potato is something.
I'm just really interested in where things came from, and it turns out they came from a lot of weird places,
Yeah. Okay. Well, so now on to ecological news, and our first story comes from it's actually the Washington Post, and it's an interesting story. There's been a lot of debate amongst scientists over the effect of clouds on global warming, because clouds, on the one hand, they reflect sunlight back out into space, which slows global warming, but on the other hand, they can act as insulators to keep the heat from escaping out into space, and so then they're acting like a blanket. And so the question is, net, are clouds good or bad, and what's going to happen? Well, unfortunately, the final results are in, and clouds are going to accelerate global warming even more, because class, what do we have with global warming? What do we call it? What process is going on here? We talk about this all the time, that it's a positive
Feedback
loop, right? It's a
loop.
positive
Positive
feedback loop.
feedback.
In other words, global warming causes more global warming.
Yeah.
So what the positive feedback loop here is it turns out that cirrus clouds, those ones really high up, the feathery looking ones, those insulate because they keep the heat from getting all the way out of the atmosphere.
That kind of makes sense because it's sort of like a solid blanket that.
Right.
Whereas the sort of weird shaped ones, the heat could go around them. You got to.
Well, yeah, and so the
out.
cumulonimbus, the ones that are down close to the ground, those reflect heat out because they've got nice white fluffy tops that put the. And so what's the projections? What they finally figured out is that with global warming, there will be less cumulus and cumulonimbus clouds created over the oceans because the conditions just won't be right. And there'll be more cirrus clouds.
Oh.
And so that means that the clouds will be speeding up the heating and not slowing it down. It's a positive feedback loop. That was a Washington Post story that was printed on the 12th of December. And it's talking about an article that was in the journal Nature Climate Change. So we're kind of in trouble there.
Kind of in trouble in a number of different areas,
Yeah.
actually. That's the point.
And that laugh was kind of at an inappropriate moment, but that's because we just had a text from a listener, thank you listener, who sent us a picture of a heart-shaped russet potato that
Oh,
we found
cute.
last week.
I like that.
Yeah, that is cute. And
That's
if you
a
want
cool
to see
looking
it,
potato.
again, another reason to look
Yeah.
at the YouTube version of the show when it comes out.
It will have the heart-shaped potato. How
Yeah.
can you resist that? You got to plan your whole week around that.
That's right. I mean, AP usually runs off stories of like duck-shaped potatoes and things
Yes.
like that. So we're right on the cutting edge of journalism
We
here.
are.
So next story, we're off to California, and we've talked before about the Public Utilities Commission and how they tried to copy Bowling Green by both penalizing people who put solar panels up by giving them a monthly penalty and by cutting the amount that they reimbursed for the electricity that people with solar panels on their house generate. And what has happened is the governor and the PUCO rejected the penalty, so they're not going to actually fine people for having solar panels after all.
Bowling Green
Hooray.
is all right. It's got some stuff going for it, but we really do not want the world as a whole to become more like Bowling Green.
Yeah, not
In most,
this-
that's not. Just be yourself and don't be Bowling Green.
Yeah, definitely not in this
Keep your
regard.
uniqueness and yeah.
But what happened this past week, unfortunately, California's Public Utilities Commission did in fact unanimously vote to slash the reimbursement for solar by roughly 75%. So that means it's going to be much, much longer to get your investment back. A lot fewer people are going to actually be able to invest in solar panels because most people need to make the investment back. It's not something you're going to get rich on, but most people can't afford to just donate the thousands of dollars needed to install solar on their houses. And what their excuse is that right now California actually has generated so much solar. In fact, it's got 13,500 gigawatts of solar, which is as much as 13 nuclear power plants. And they're finding that they're getting too much power in the afternoon. I say too much. They're generating more than they're using in the afternoon, which actually is not too much because you can just then export that to your surrounding states. That's how the grid works. But after the sun goes down, it's still hot in California, and you still need air conditioning in a lot of places. And then there is no solar, and so the Public Utilities Commission is saying, oh well, what we want to do is have everybody put solar plus batteries on their house, and not just have solar. But the problem is that roughly doubles the cost, which means that only really wealthy people who don't have to make their investment back will be able to afford to do it. And all the poor people who benefit from having solar in their neighborhood, as in with lower electricity prices and so forth, they will lose that benefit. And so...
and it is a real struggle for low-income people, I can tell you from personal experience, to handle their utilities.
Right. So anything that
Especially
makes...
if anything, if the price goes up a little bit, it hits us real hard.
Right. So anything that makes electricity more expensive, like penalizing people who put solar on their roof to supply energy to their neighbors, will hurt the poor. And so what this proves is that even though they suffered a minor setback in that they weren't able to actually penalize people with solar, it proves that the utilities are in firm control of the state of California. This is PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric essentially dictated this policy to the Public Utilities Commission, despite huge public outcry against it, because nobody wants to have solar discouraged the way it has been in some other places where the utility companies control the state government, like Ohio, just for coincidentally. So on to our next story, which we're moving right along here. This is one that you probably heard about on the mainstream media, and that is that fusion has had a quote-unquote breakthrough. They had, at the National Ignition Laboratory, they zapped some deuterium with a bunch of lasers and produced roughly 1.5 times the energy that they used in the lasers to generate power. They produced more power than they used, according to the mainstream media. But our friends at NIRS, Nuclear Information Resource Service, took a closer look at this, and it turns out that the way they've kind of fudged the numbers here. And so what happened is they counted the amount of energy in the lasers as they were zapping the deuterium. But what they didn't count was the amount of energy that went into the laser machines to create the lasers that then zapped the deuterium. And that amount of energy was actually 250 times the amount they generated with the fusion. So it's like taking the energy of your flashlight beam and not counting the energy in the batteries that are running the flashlight beam.
Okay.
And so this was, in fact, in no way anywhere near even breaking even. It was 250 times less than the energy used to generate it. And NIRS points out that there's a lot of problems with this form of nuclear fusion because even though it doesn't generate the radioactive isotopes that nuclear fission does, you don't have plutonium, you don't have neptunium, all those weird radioactive isotopes don't get generated. But what happens is in the reaction, when the nuclei fuse, the deuterium, and deuterium is a hydrogen atom with 1 proton and 1 neutron, so you fuse 2 of those together, you get a helium atom with 2 protons, and then it shoots off 1 of the neutrons or 2 of the neutrons out into everything surrounding it. And so what happens with nuclear fusion is the building, the people, everything around the fusion reactor get bombarded with neutrons. And so what happens over time is they then become radioactive, because if you keep shooting neutrons into things, they become radioactive. And so eventually a fusion reactor, the entire building will become radioactive waste. And so again, it's incredible expense, and it doesn't really, they keep saying 10 years from commercial application. They've been saying that for 50 years. I'm 60, and I remember when I was 10 years old hearing that fusion was about 10 years away.
This is not to say that fusion is a good idea, but I was just thinking this week about IVF. Do you remember there was like a period in the 1970s when people were terrified of that and thought test tube babies were going to be unnatural freaks? Remember that?
I do remember. They were afraid.
I just shared this week, and it's like I'm realizing that half of my friends on my friend list are probably either products of IVF or have used it to have children.
Yeah.
So that was sort of entertaining.
Yeah, we're not against all technology. I mean, sometimes environmentalists are accused of that we're opposed to every kind of science, but no, we
don't really know.
No,
yeah.
there's some things that are good. There's a lot of nice people around that are because of things like IVF.
Very true, yeah.
All right, next story. We're going to jump over the pond.
That and bucket seats. Bucket seats were very upsetting.
Well, I remember.
For a while.
I remember when seatbelts were.
Yeah.
People were afraid they'd be decapitated because
Yeah.
they were wearing seatbelts and if they got in an accident.
You still hear that once in a while, but they might do such and such. Well, but they mostly don't.
Yeah,
you know?
they don't. Yeah. So, all right. So jumping over the pond to merry old England for our next story. England. This actually happened back in July, but we're just catching up with it now. England has actually stopped reprocessing spent nuclear fuel. And the reason they did it is they've been doing it at the Sellafield site for roughly, was it 45 years? They started in 1964. Oh, okay, so it's more than 45. It's almost 60 years. They've been taking spent nuclear waste from nuclear power plants, dissolving it, and plucking out the plutonium and the uranium in order to fuel more nuclear power plants. And so this is the quote-unquote closed nuclear fuel cycle. The problem is that they've been doing this for 60 years, and they've hopelessly contaminated the area of Sellafield, because that always happens when you dissolve nuclear waste and start messing with it. They processed 55,000 tons of fuel, but in the process, that would have created roughly 500,000 tons of like sludge and leftover nuclear waste and stuff that they didn't get processed. But the big reason they've stopped is because over those almost 60 years, they've piled up 150 tons of plutonium, which is like the most dangerous substance on Earth, because even a tiny, tiny microgram will kill you if you inhale it. And they don't know what to do with it. They're sitting on 150 tons of the most toxic substance ever created by humans.
Okay, if you were going to do something as crazy dangerous as have a nuke plant, the order should be first you develop a plan, then you start building the nuke plant.
Right.
Like you should have an end game about what you're going to do with the waste, really. And if we can't agree on that as a society, then maybe it's not something that's good for us. If everybody is like, no, I don't want that around me, that's a sign of something.
Right. Well, but this reprocessing, this was the closest thing they had to a plan.
Right.
They thought, we'll just take the waste and make it into fuel again. And it's supposed to be this magic forever energy generation thing. But it has not worked out anywhere on the planet that they've tried it. They've ended up contaminating huge areas. And when this was the most successful version, and it is a victim of its own success, because they essentially created a whole new slew of nuclear wastes that they don't know what to do with. And they're sitting on 150 tons of plutonium that they don't know what to do with. And so they finally shut the place down. Thank goodness for that anyways. The first step is you stop digging. When you're in a hole, they've stopped digging, finally.
That's always a good idea, yeah.
All right. Last story, and the promise, we have to have a theme music for HB6 stories. I think maybe the theme song to Dawn of the Dead would be appropriate, because it just keeps coming back. Larry Householder, the former head of the Ohio Assembly, who is implicated in this House Bill 6 scandal, Ohio's largest bribery scandal in its history, his trial is actually going to start. Oh, there you go. That's appropriate.
Yay, Josh.
His trial is actually going to start on January 23rd, finally. And some of you might be saying, HB6, wasn't that back in 2019? And the answer is yes. He's managed to delay this process for 3 years. But finally, it's going to happen in a few weeks. Householders' lawyers want to block all the bribery confessions that have already been made. Oh yeah, I think that's enough for the music. They want to block the bribery confessions that other people have already made on this issue, understandably, and hopefully the judge won't go along with that. And then Householder plans to bring expert witnesses who are going to prove that this is just business as usual, that this is how all legislation in Ohio gets done. Apparently,
I really hope that isn't true.
And so the government wants to block that witness of Householders, understandably. It sounds kind of like a blackmail threat, doesn't it? That you prosecute me, I'm gonna I'm going to bring everything out and we'll all go down together. Maybe that's what's going to happen.
I'm
So
cool with them all going down together.
yeah, I wouldn't mind.
Fine with me.
Wouldn't bother me. One of the most interesting people who is probably going to get caught up in this is the former chair of the Ohio Republican Party, Matt Borges. And he's claiming that the only reason he's getting caught up in this scandal is because he refused to support Donald J. Trump in the last election. And I don't see how that makes any sense. I don't see how that's connected to...
So what, maybe the Republicans would have protected him from prosecution if he'd supported Trump? Is that what he's trying to say?
I think maybe that's what he's trying to say. I don't really get the reasoning. But it promises to be kind of an incredible event in terms of revealing how the sausage is made in the state assembly. And, it's just another example of the nuclear industry being in a corrupt government situation, because we're not the only ones that have had nuclear industry scandals, political scandals. They've had them in Illinois, they've had them in Pennsylvania, they've had them in England. Literally everywhere in the world, the nuclear industry and political corruption go hand in hand.
Gang of pirates they are.
Yes, but that's why we're here, to bring you guys the information, because it's good people know these things. Thank you so much for listening. That's our show for this week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!